Welcome, everyone. Lovely to see you in the latest set of the webinars for the IIHS University's new teaching programs. And I am really happy to have four wonderful colleagues and friends of the institution join us. Rahul Sharma, Soubadra, Devy, Smruti, Koppikar, and Deepti Talpade. Thanks, four of you very much, and welcome to everyone who's joining us. Quick logistics before we start. Today, we are not in meeting mode on Zoom, but on webinar mode. So there is a Q&A box today that's at the bottom and not your chat box. So just keep an eye on that. But for this one also, I'd like you, unlike our other webinars where we've done a lot of question and answer, this one is really for you to take the chance to sit back and listen for a bit. So for about 30, 35, 40 minutes, I'm going to be talking to our four panelists. And the idea is to give you a sense of two things from this conversation. The first one is what interdisciplinary careers actually look like. Whether or not they identify themselves as such, we think of all four of our co-panelists as folks that have worked across discipline, sector, and profession in unexpected ways. And it's one of the things that we keep saying to our students always, right? That what you were formally trained as has a relationship to, but not some deterministic one-to-one of what you do. And that's really at the heart of those interdisciplinary careers and opportunities. And the second is that all of them have had a chance to engage with learners and fellows that have worked at IIHS or graduated at IIHS or learned in IIHS classrooms, either as a part of the internships in our master's program that many of you are applying for. Term 6 is an internship. It has similarly been in all teaching at IIHS so far, but many have also had graduates of our programs work with them for several years after in different capacities. So there are also people who know, not just in one sense, what different ways of working in the urban look like, but also what working with IIHS graduates look like. And I'm hoping, I'm also secretly quite convinced we asked them to join us because they have some nice things to say about our graduates. So we'll talk a little bit about both of those things. But I really also wanted everyone in this webinar today to use this opportunity to also get a sense of what kind of things are possible and the different kinds of ways people are using training and working to make a difference in not just our metropolitan cities, but in a range of settlements, starting from the ecological and semi-wild regions to villages, to towns, then to the bigger cities and all the connections in the middle. So really taking the human settlements of IIHS quite seriously in its spectrum, but also putting together what we have always said in our advertisements, that actually folks from any discipline can apply to our programs. And we take that very seriously. So the composition of the panel also reflects that. So actually, I'm going to go and ask each of you in turn, therefore, without introducing you in detail, actually ask you to do that for me, but with a particular way. I'd like you to introduce yourself a little bit with your own disciplinary trajectory, what you studied, where you worked earlier, where you work now. So folks, younger folks listening on the webinar can also get a sense of the way you put things together, answering some of the questions there. And then at the end, to tell us a bit about your current roles and the organizations where you are. And I'll ask you a bit more about that next. So really, Rahul, let me start with you. Talking about your training, talking about the kind of things you do and the position you hold now at Indus Action, but also at University College London's work on relational state capacity.
Thanks so much, Gautam. Am I audible?
Yes, you are good.
So I'm Rahul. I currently work as the Director for Research and Impact at Indus Action, which is an organization that works on enhancing social protection and mainly works with governments on systems with data and sort of technology re-engineering and just sort of realignment so that it's more citizen focused. That's one part of my job where I look at the impact funnel for the organization, but also do a lot of research on social protection broadly. And my other job is I'm a research fellow at University College London, where I mainly work on state capacity. And that is sort of pure research. Just, on background, I, like many Indians, started out with engineering. I studied electrical engineering. I actually ended up using that for a few years after I graduated. I joined an organization that worked on rural electrification. spent some time in many parts of rural India building solar power plants. So some part of my electrical engineering actually came into use, but really one part of the work that we were doing was to build community institutions that could manage those solar power plants, and also figuring out how to do livelihoods well with this new energy that was being provided to these villages. So spent a lot of time in very remote villages, building these plants, but also working on sort of just strengthening institutions that could both maintain the power plant, but also think about things like market linkages. That got me interested a lot more on communities and people. I sort of moved away from the energy and climate space, which I'd been working on for those years. Oh, and one more thing. I mean, of course, there was a lot of interaction with the district and block bureaucracy. So both of these things started to happen, right? It was started to look at what this wasn't the sort of the big ministries in Delhi. It was really district and block level officers who were working on questions of water, of roads in those areas, or sort of social welfare programs on livelihoods generation, etc. So that kind of took me, I thought that that was really where I wanted to shift to. Ended up shifting to that, then got myself a master's in public policy, did a PhD in political science and organization studies with an emphasis on quantitative methods, and then spent a few years at the Center for Policy Research, helped with a senior colleague building out the state capacity initiative, which really started looking at questions of administrative reform, the bureaucracy, and a whole lot of other sort of broader questions on state capacity, including regulatory state capacity, the welfare state, etc. And yeah, since then I've been at UCL and at Intersection. So I mean, I don't know how long you wanted me to speak, but
that's all right. Yeah, that's why I'm nodding meaningfully in your direction, saying
okay,
that sounds good.
So yes, so I mean, there are lots of different things that have happened, but I'm hoping I've not set sort of a bad precedent for how long this interdisciplinary introduction is supposed to be. Thanks.
No. I think it's lovely to hear both that mix, but also the different moves in terms of scale and now in terms of delivery, and this mix also of having research along with implementation and practice in many ways. Soubadra, let me come to you. What was your journey?
Oh, yeah, well, you wouldn't believe I started with a BSc Applied Geography with Geology and Astronomy. And boom, there was this nice course, MS in Ecology, as it was called, in Pondicherry University. We had stars like Rauf Ali and Priya Davidar. So, very inspiring faculty. That's where I finished my master's. And then straight, I think they introduced me to this Kalakad Mundathurai Tiger Reserve. And I haven't since then left it. So I started my PhD there. It took me to what we call as the 8th continental canopy, which is about 25 to 30 meters above ground, the rainforest canopy, which is continuous floor. So started with very rickety ladders with tribals building it. It's this what you call my canopy access system with ladders going up, highly risky, but I was this nutty case who did still go up. Hardly, the ladders hardly used to have the foothold, but it was against gravity. It's not your typical ladder. Soon we graduated to the single rope and started exploring canopy, and I started working, looking at, canopy is as you call the 8th continent, but I started looking at the pollinator interactions at community level. That was my PhD. It was an untouched sanctuary, but while I was working, I saw how the landscape around the sanctuary got very drastically transformed, creating absolutely a very, a distinct matrix. It was very stark, the difference as protected area and the things started. Urbanization was one. So that was then, and of course, my first job was in Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and in the environment. So I've been one of those early pioneers and part of the organization, which had the vision of having interdisciplinarity right from start. And I don't know how. Many people thought it was very pioneering at that stage when we started it, and we believe in a very inclusive and more just conservation. And the organization itself has two centers. One is the Biodiversity and Conservation, others the Center for Environment and Center for Environment and Development. So from all this forested landscape, thought I've landed in the resilient urban. I lead the resilient urbanscape. That's been my journey. But yeah, I started as an ecologist, but my collaborations have been with sociologists and economists to make it more interdisciplinary. Although I was not trained to do, so it was through collaboration I achieved.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think both of you are already building up the narrative that this is the faith in which IIHS University was also set up, exactly in the faith of making these connections earlier, not just through our lives, but actually doing it as part of our education. And that's sort of the shift. Smruti, let me come to you.
Thank you for having me, and it's great being with you on the IIHS panel. Smruti, where do I start? This is my 36th, 37th year in journalism. We started when there were no computers in newsrooms. We wrote by hand and typed. So this is just to say that I'm ancient enough to remember that interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity was not a thing for the longest of times. Whether in our academic places or in our workplaces, it wasn't. One of the first things that struck me was when Anil Agarwal launched Center for Science and Environment, and much later Down to Earth came. It kind of spoke to me that there's something important to be done here. And I'll tell you why. Because at that point, environment, ecology, people, gender, these were not even beats. These were not even issues that journalists looked at, okay? You were either doing politics, or you were doing crime, or you were doing films, or if you were doing government, then you just got sent to some sort of a vriksharopan, tree planting ceremony by way of environment coverage. Okay, that is what it was. And therefore, the coming of Center for Science and Environment, the Down to Earth, in Bombay, Darryl De Monte, I'm sure many of you know him or have heard his name. Darryl De Monte setting up a federation for environmental journalism and making environment a beat for the first time in the Times of India in the 1990s was such a big thing. It was really a big thing. And many of us kind of gravitated towards it, not knowing the eye of interdisciplinarity. But once you got into it, and then I got nominated for 2 fellowships, one in Japan, one in the US, I did go and present the papers that I was asked to, and I had worked on, and with Darryl mentoring me. But I realized that my background is psychology for 1 year, which I ditched and moved to economics, because that I was told was the best way to be financially independent for a woman in the
We've all been
80s.
told that once in a while. Yes.
Right? To do economics and management. So I sort of veered towards economics. Then I did sociology, and I did a little bit of law. And, the classic drifter, I had no clue of what really. But all of this sort of serendipitously came together in journalism. Because I realized, and even more so in doing anything with ecology or environmental journalism, because in those fellowships, I realized that there is an entire body of science and technical work in the field that had simply not come to us in India unless we went to those American Center and the British Council Library and sat with those papers and, all of that. So to sort of bring it all into the work that I did eventually towards the latter part of my career in Outlook as an associate editor, as a senior editor in Hindustan Times. I think all of these things prepared me to do this, because we were able to set up these interdisciplinary cells, interdisciplinary ways of looking at something. So the Uttarakhand flood started and it was all devastated. So how does Uttarakhand build back? But you can't just build back a village without building back an entire ecosystem. So it was economics, it was sociology, it was environment, and all of it, and therefore I think nothing goes waste for all the young people who are listening. Rahul said a little bit about doing engineering and all of that. Really, nothing goes waste because each discipline teaches us a way of thinking if we approach it in the right spirit. And I would say that environment, ecology, and journalism, they really are intersectional. You can't be in journalism, especially in leadership roles, and not know the Paris Agreement.
Yes.
I've had an editor when I was not in a leadership role, but I was an editor. I had a senior editor ask me, listen, I can't ask anyone else this question, but can you tell me what exactly mangroves are? And why are they so important? Isn't it just a waste? Why are they important? So I did the next best thing. I got him into a cab and I came to Mahim Creek. And we stood at Mahim Creek and I made him smell the horrible Mumbai air. And I said, look, these are the mangroves. These mangroves are what save Mumbai from the floods every year. Yeah. So at the moment, I am the founder editor of an online journal called Question of Cities. We're about 3 years old, but it's been much longer in the making. And we look at cities. The journal looks at cities through twin lenses. One is nature, and nature includes a lot more than environment. So nature and people. And so everything to do with people, from housing to recreation to children, play, all of that. So I feel that all of these years and decades have sort of come together for me right now.
It's lovely. And I really think that if I think of all our students who've been journalists, this is one place where that intrinsic DNA of knowing enough about many things and knowing how to quickly find out something about something new. It's such a character of the profession. So it's lovely to hear. Deepti, let me come to you. In a much more straight up traditional urban role with WRI, one of our most premier urban think tanks, institutions, tell us about your journey. And then I'm going to switch to a slightly quicker response round on 2 questions, and we'll open it up. Deepti, go ahead.
Sure. Hi. Thanks so much for having me here. And very exciting. I mean, I've worked with IIHS, interns who have now turned into, like proper roles in the organization. So I really know what the whole kind of different disciplines that everyone comes from, and happy to share my journey. So I started as a architect from KRVI, Mumbai, where we were mainly kind of investigating, how to investigate the urban was really the kind of, larger kind of pedagogical question. And I was very much in the heart. So I was like for 8 years in KRVI doing my bachelor's, master's, being part of the design cell, working with Dharavi. I mean, working on Dharavi, that was 2007. So it was just, the whole kind of Mukesh Mehta plan, understanding that political conflict and how do you create a people's plan, and from there on to kind of mapping Dharavi, understanding problems. So that whole journey of going on the field, understanding the issues more closely, and creating arguments to give a different scenario of redevelopment. So that is a journey, and that really kind of got me to get more interested into understanding informal settlements. How do you have inclusive development, etc. So from there on, I mean, urban design was just an extension of that, really. And understanding those systems, understanding that, all the practices. I mean, even, I was teaching at some point, and how teaching also is, contributing so much. It's a practice. Teaching is also practice, and research is practice.
A lot on it, yeah.
Yeah. So, that was really a huge kind of scope. And I was trying through my kind of teaching and academic career to do what I could. And then on, I did MSc in urban management, which was again like taking one problem on redevelopment of housing of a transit settlement in Bharatnagar in BKC, and then looking at what is the next problem for, you know, how do you solve for the problem of the community coming together and self-developing. And that became like my thesis and, you know, kind of, and so really trying to solve problems from there on, and moving from one kind of learning and exposure to the other has been my journey. I used to even, you know, when I was looking for jobs, I used to have this one diagram that I used to make, that, you know, in the private sector, in the third sector, you know, with the government, and how my journey has kind of helped me kind of build skills across different sort of, you know, those kind of experiences. So from then on, I mean, I was working for a bit in London also to, again, very, very similar role to what is in WRI, which is very like, you know, a mixed team of individuals trying to look at pilots, looking at cities as, you know, test beds to find out an experiment of how to work with the government and solve for problems, which could be waste management, water, you know, housing, etc. So, and so from there on, I mean, my journey has been also with, you know, working a lot with third sector actually. And like with Aga Khan, with you know, previously Pani Haq Samiti, with yeah, the different contours of a profession. And then I was working on the development plan of Mumbai. So with a little bit of that background, working on the development plan of Mumbai was like, okay, this is like planning from, you know, like an aerial view of a city, which was just like detached me. And I tried to understand that what problems do governments really have in the offices, you know, kind of getting that experience that how does the government office work? What are the pressures that governments really take on a day-to-day basis to deliver? So that sort of journey of planning and then very ground kind of experience has slowly kind of led me to venturing with different practices. And now I am in WRI working on climate in the climate space. But yeah, all this has really been useful.
Thanks so much. You know, I hope folks are listening also to see in some ways, these are the kinds of interdisciplinarities and moves between practice and research and discipline that the IIHS Masters and PhD programs are trying to hold. So actually now I'm going to ask you two questions and one by one, and we'll do short answers, about a minute and a half each to open it up. And the first one, actually, Deepti, you've already begun to talk about, which is, you know, when folks say to us, but what is the urban sector? What are urban careers? What does it mean to work in cities? Now, here's a journalist, an ecologist, a political scientist, and a classic architect, planner, urban designer. Now, it's, for many people, Deepti is the only urban professional here, because that's what we thought of the urban. It was the spatial sciences, architecture, planning, design, maybe civil engineering. So I want to ask all of you, for you, what is this notion of saying, I work on cities, in cities? You'd say that there are many different ways to think about making a career in the urban, whether or not, you know, where you come from. So if I was to say to you, for you, what is the importance of the urban in your work? Is it a site where you work? Is it one of the sites where you work? Is it sort of central to your, is it the place where you intervene? Deepti, were talking about solving solutions, waste management, mobility, housing, very deeply, etc. there. So is it your conceptual home? Is it an area of your research? What do you see? I'll start with Soubadra this time. Soubadra, what is, you know, starting from that reserve on the 8th continent trade, what, you know, for you, someone might say, but you're not, you know, where's the urban? But you're now resilient urban scapes.
Yes, I mean, it's a journey. I'm sort of taking the, I mean, the canopy is looked at as where 3/4 of the biodiversity sit, right? And then you come to something like urban area, where it's almost like, I mean, you compare in terms of scale, I think you feel there's nothing here, right? So when I really moved to the sector, it was a little depressing, because it has been in the rainforest, seeing line-tailed macaque, which is a rare animal, at eye level, and you know, it's been a conscious move. You know, I really believe in putting a little biodiversity in the place where we work, play, and do whatever. So, and I think that's very important. And I really believe in the ecologist Rosenwig's concept of reconciliation ecology. You know, you cannot bring forests to the urban scapes. What you have here is your parks. and parks, and now again, people are biased towards the heritage long, big, huge parks. But there are also your urban parks. How do you help these parks become a home for biodiversity? So I really believe in putting back some biodiversity in the place which is at close nexus. This heritage, your Lal Bagh and other things. You visit maybe once in a month, do the bird watching and come back. So I think that is very important. Your neighborhood lakes, not just look at this big spaces, but then other thing is we have this lawns, right? They are the green desert. So I think it's also a bit of British culture. They like a little bit of Scotland, their backyard, I think. So it's a legacy left behind. So I feel we can nudge, make that also become a biodiversity. So I really believe in the concept of reconciliation ecology. So even say the lake, people only talk about water. Of course, we need to have some native fish. We have the rogu and katla. So, but when you really talk to some of these fishers, they talk about how they used to host tasty native fish in contrast to, not only that, even the rings, the shore around the lake becomes very important. They can also, you sort of make, otherwise you have this running tracks where people don't even look around. So, you have to make the track slow and give this nice goodies for them to pause and reflect on it, and connecting the people to nature.
Intervening. I like this idea of reconciliation, because I think it's very interesting on that. Rahul, for you, I mean, state institutions, social protection delivery is universal. You may even say rural poverty vulnerability needs it even more. So what does it mean to look at the state in the urban, or is the urban important for you?
No, so I think you sort of opened it up in the right way. I mean, I work on social protection, broadly human development, right? So I mean, I think if you think about social protection as not just the transfer of things from the state to people, then it is, the underlying question is, what are the various kinds of support that people require at the right moments that allows them to flourish? And that is a question that is across rural and urban. But there are differences, and I think that's having a sort of urban perspective in it and an urban disposition when you come in to look at these questions, I think I found to be quite useful. So one, there are things like I'll just give a few examples and maybe that will help clarify. But so, for example, one of the things that we do is that we work on the right to education, 12(1)(c), which mandates 25% reservation for marginalized children or children from marginalized households in private schools. Now, the differences that you will see perhaps between students who have taken that route, come through the RTE, and say other students who have come through the private route are likely to be much starker in many of our metropolises than they're going to be in peri-urban and smaller towns and rural India, right? So I mean, once you start thinking about any of these programs in the urban, certain differences emerge, right? And so one of the differences in the urban context is that you do start seeing much starker differences in social capital between children in mixed classrooms. And so what do you do to actually help those other kids flourish, right? That's one example. The other example is of labor. You have, with the large and organized sector that we have most people coming to the urban to look for jobs. Their registration, their welfare entitlements are typically in their home state and their home district. How do you kind of think about a new system that allows for portability of entitlements? The urban is a very particular place in that sense because people don't have their homes typically there. They're staying on rent. So how do you think about social protection differently for those who are coming into cities to work? And the last I would say is governance. And again, this is even though we have and this is a challenge. I mean, I think and others who have done much more work on, say, urban governance might be able to speak to it more closely. I've done some, but we don't have the same kind of capacities in urban government that we have in the district government and the district administration that most of us have worked with and studied. And urban governance and how to kind of improve the capacities in urban areas, and IIHS has done a lot of work on it, is a huge open field. The logics of that government are very different. The way the hierarchy works, the way that funds flow works are all very different compared to the district administration, which typically implements programs and that we are more familiar with and where the money goes. So I think, across the kind of things I work, I would say the urban is really giving us a whole set of new questions and very tough questions to answer.
Okay, thank you. No, that's just Smruti, for you, can you tell a journalist does a journalist have an urban focus expertise? Is it almost like something you can develop to differentiate yourself professionally? I mean, you started a journal called The Question of Cities. So it's a very deliberate choice around centering the urban. What was there for you?
So that really the term and the way of looking at the urban came through these many years of spending days and nights in newsrooms and in TV studios that sort of fragmented cities and people in cities because that was the only way to bring in the stories for the day. And really nothing in the urban is so fragmented. It's a really complex web, whether you look at land, water, transport, people. But I mean, if I were to think deeper about your question, I would say that the urban is a tangible, physical site. It is the buildings, it is the plans, it is the buildings that give it character, the look, feel, see. And we all, I think, know cities that look different. The older city looks very different from the newer one. So it's this very tangible material thing. But the urban and the urbanization, that term, which completely fascinates me to this day, it is really a mindset, right? It's about aspirations. It's about the ability of making something of yourself on your own, which a city provides. And therefore, the urban means aspirations and opportunities.
Right.
And which is why we've seen migration into cities for years together. I mean, whether it was the British Bombay or, Surat, Delhi, whatever. It's never going to end. And I remember one interview in which, Mr. Bal Thackeray had said that we're going to put some kind of stops or something at the entry points and Mumbai is bursting and you can't come into Mumbai anymore. And we said that if you don't want people to come into Mumbai, just don't produce the jobs here. To shut down every industry. As long as you have jobs, as long as you have opportunities, people are going to come to cities. And so cities, the urban really is also a mindset. It's an emotion, it's aspirations, it's opportunities, it's dreams. It's also the site of a lot of contestation, right. I would say. For example, to take just one example, a contestation between the private and the public. Right? What is really public in the urban? What are the urban commons if we were to sit down and make a list? Where does the private and public intersect? I mean, right now in Mumbai, there's this huge controversy going on about keeping the BST buses public or not, or shutting them down, and Question of Cities just finished an edition on that. And the entire approach of the administration, both of the municipal corporation, which is one of the richest corporations in Asia, as you all know, and that of the state government, is that it's a loss-making entity. But hello, how is a public service supposed to make profits? The very idea of a public service is that it is going to need some kind of subsidy, right? So if you're going to use the benchmark of a private, evaluation, private sector evaluation of profit and loss, then by that token, we should have no public schools, no public hospitals. This, Mumbai has some of the largest and the best known public hospitals, 3-4 of them, that still see a total footfall every day that far exceeds the ones in the private sector. So I see cities increasingly, I see the urban increasingly as a site of contestation.
That's right.
some kind of conflict, maybe at the conceptual level, at the real level, to do with land for sure. Who owns how much land?
Land,
And
capital, identity,
absolutely,
caste,
right? So who
religion,
gets to
these are our
make the
moves.
city? And therefore, the question really is, at this stage, for me, who gets to make the city? Who makes the urban, really?
Yeah. No. And I think they're thinking also about that, not just in terms of professions, but in terms of interests and capacities. And those are, I think, that makes me say, I'm looking at our time, and I'm going to, Deepti, use you to pivot to our next question as well. In ways, and it is to ask you a question that I think everyone on the webinar really wants to hear, which is from you all, shifting a bit on, so if the urban is all of these different things and you have all of these different practices into it, when you all put on your hiring hats as institutions, when you look for young people to come work with you, when graduates of these masters will come work with you, a lot of questions people ask is, but aren't you looking for particular degrees? Don't you want urban designers, Deepti? Don't you want architects and planners, right? Do you actually want people trained from the sociological perspective or who are looking at political scientists? So the questions I'm sort of asking you actually is the heart of interdisciplinarity and its effect on employability and recognition in the market, right? This is a genuine concern that a lot of people have. So what I'm asking you is two things, actually. One is, what does it mean to you to hire people who are mixed discipline, or are there particular disciplines that have more weight in your place? Like Smruti was saying, learn economics if you want a certain independence, was something many of us was told. But also beyond that, I want to ask you, what is it that you're looking for in people you hire? What sensibilities, what skills, what does it make you, who do you want in your organizations to be with you in solving these complex urban problems? And I'll ask each of you to take a minute on this. And for everyone on the webinar, now is a good time for the Q&A box. So I want to just say one thing about your questions. This is a specific webinar on careers, employability, trajectories. So think of those questions. If you have particular questions about one of the MS programs, all the master's programs have had specific webinars. The recordings are live. You can always write to us and reach out to us. So just think about asking questions for this panel, and the Q&A box is open for you. I'm happy to take you all the way to 7 if you're in listening mode, but in case you have.
Yeah. No, so interesting question about first the previous question, which was around, how do you kind of look at urban and intervene, and connects also to the second one, which is, then who do you really need to work with? So, I mean, the way I have worked so far across different organizations, different institutions, etc., is to understand the kind of position that the institution really has. And, how then I am supposed to kind of work around, so if, for example, it's a private institution, you have to wear that hat also, and then try to still solve problems of, making sure welfare is really at the heart of what is delivered, versus when it's an NGO, you're working with the idea of how our business is also created, so, but again, like, when it comes to working in the urban, my approach has always been working through the sites, like really being on ground, whatever the project, really kind of hitting the ground, finding out. And that's where I think when you say that, architects, urban designers and planners are, like the heart of, that's where I think we believe that we can solve for problems. But, once you actually go on ground, you realize you need so many different skills, and we can't, like, we can just kind of give some sort of solution, but that solution is so static that you don't know how to implement it. And, that's where the journey begins for all the other skills to come in on data collection, on, analysis, on understand, on having entrepreneurial skills to understand, problems better, on having sociological skills, because, even political science, like, understanding the political economy and seeing how a solution fits into that. Having engineering skills, obviously, like the technical skills of what solutions are going to be applied, having an idea of governance at the same time. So, even an anthropologist, even, all of them become so useful, and we feel so deficient all the time, where we are not able to, no matter what, like, see, and there is, I would say, there is always this kind of bias of, in the recruitment process, where when you find people who are kind of speaking your language, you tend to, get easily aligned with them, just to realize that you're just making clones of yourself, and that's not going to take you where you want to go to solve the problem on ground, right? So I think all those different sort of aspects, even legal experts, and all these different kind of
And have you felt,
professionals
Deepti, an
coming.
increasing openness in a place like WRI, that you look around your teams now and they are more interdisciplinary than they were when you started?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And trying to look to kind of, having more of that,
Right.
and having a proportion of multidisciplinarity more than a single kind of planning mindset.
Now
So
that's very.
absolutely.
Soubadra, what about you? I mean, one could say very specific technical ecosystem knowledge, scientific knowledge, but ATREE also is very interdisciplinary. So what is it that you look for when you want people to join your team, either the urban team or the
I
other?
think we say first it should be applied research. I think that's a criteria.
Mhm.
And we believe in building evidence through hardcore research, be it the field of biodiversity, climate, or sustainability. Then leading on to an implementation of sandbox stage. And we also looking for people with skills who will also be able to do feed into the outreach. Earlier on, we had different teams taking us. I think now we will look at individuals who will be able to build the strong evidence, also go on to implementation and build an outreach. I think a little bit of everything. I think they should be more rounded. I think we believe in building leadership. So we would really like them to go from a hardcore evidence-based application to, of course, outreach, which could be policy. It could be, multiple things. Yeah.
Very different skill sets at very different parts of the cycle system.
Exactly.
Rahul, you, skill sets, sensibilities, training?
Yeah, I mean, I think and always giving space to the disciplinary experts because you need that, and there's a lot of components of the work that we do that only people with hardcore engineering skills can pull off, and one
Right.
has space for that. But I think in the space of research and operations, which are research and monitoring and evaluation is what I will speak to. Operations is something that a very large team does. I mean, I don't think I've seen a single disciplinary person in this sort of human development, social sector space in a very, very long time. I haven't seen one of those CVs. I haven't actually ended up because I think what interdisciplinarity gives you in many ways is the ability to be able to collaborate better with a certain kind of sensibility, not just because you're a better person inherently in terms of collaboration, but in terms of the questions that you can ask your teammates, the way that you can present material to each other. A lot of people who have these interdisciplinary backgrounds are having an easier time getting into management or leadership roles because fairly early on they're able to articulate sort of and work with sort of diverse perspectives. Of course, again, making sure that you have the technical knowledge where you have it in your organization. So a few things I think where I'm seeing a lot of scope, and in fact, perhaps sometimes much better scope for people who do this kind of have come from this kind of background is in of course research, in sort of social systems, asking better questions. I think comes from being able to pull in and not sit in your little silos of political science and economics and sociology, because you are working with systems where all of that in the real world is actually happening. It's only in the university space that it is in different departments, but in the world it's not. So if it is actually happening, then you will ask better questions in those kinds of spaces. The other place is in monitoring and evaluation, which is something that I lead for Intersection. But here, as we start thinking about systems, I think, how do you actually think about monitoring and evaluation that is beyond just counting numbers, right? How do you actually explain systemic change? A lot of people from sort of broader interdisciplinary backgrounds are well suited to do those kinds of things where they can connect the micro to the macro, because that's the story that you want to tell. I also see a lot of scope for them in fundraising teams because they're able to take the different narratives of the organization, different sort of pieces of the organization, and turn that into a narrative that is interesting and useful for funders. So people who can write well and who can communicate well but also have a sort of understanding of taking multiple pieces and turning that into a cohesive narrative, I think are going to do very well and are doing very well in fundraising teams. And the last thing I think I'd say, and this one part is repeated, that, systems is where a lot of people say we want to do systems change. They don't necessarily know how to measure it. There are many organizations right now trying to figure out how do we measure this complex thing called systems change. Oftentimes the indicators come down to the same old quant, let's count this and that. This is about telling a very complex story and telling it really well. So I think there is, and funders are increasingly looking for people who are thinking about systemic change. So I think that's one thing. And just sort of in a world like ours, where we do sort of social protection, welfare, work so closely with governments, and this may not always come through interdisciplinary education, but definitely gets sort of built there, if it's part of the curriculum, is a sensibility towards politics. You can't do any of this work if you don't have to be political yourself. You don't have to take part in any rallies or join a political party, but you have to have some sensibility towards politics, because that is really, it's such a big part, and perhaps one of the biggest parts of how any decision is being taken, why certain groups have certain access to resources, how long it's going to take to get something done. It's not just a bureaucratic world. It's not a technocratic world. It is a deeply political world. So I think, if that kind of sensibility, along with sort of looking at systems, along with looking at data in this sort of different kinds of data in these complex systems, comes together, then I think you get, I think that would be the ideal candidate for me. I found many, so it's possible.
Thanks. Smruti?
I would come in here at two levels. One is within the media. I think within the media, we are now looking at young people with multimedia skills. So to sort of dumb it down, I would say, if you have a good story to tell, can you tell it in text? Can you tell it through video? Can you tell it in a podcast? Can you make a short film about it? Can you also do social media work with it? So in the media itself, we are looking for multi-skilled people. But merely having skills to tell a story doesn't make sense unless you know what kinds of stories you would want to tell, what kind of content do you want to deal with. And for that, some of the things that we've all spoken about in this webinar come into use. You have to know economics, you have to know the political economy, you have to know something about land, the way it operates, all of that. So you do need content knowledge, a domain expertise in one or two areas would be of great help. But there are people out there, right, to guide you and tell you that this is the story, take this in, and this is exactly the difference between 1.5 and 2 and why we need to. So domain knowledge is important, welcome, but you have to know what to do with that domain knowledge if you're in the media. So in the media, I would say we need now, increasingly, we're going to need multimedia, multi-skilled people. But if you are a media person covering the urban, covering cities, then you definitely need interdisciplinarity. If you want to do something with your life, to do something meaningful with your work, because there are reporters, there are editors who've stuck with one kind of reporting and writing for 20 years. And then there are some of us who are not completely satisfied, and we want to move from domain to domain and do something that is a lot more like an inclusive kind of potpourri, a kaleidoscope. And that is really what our cities are, right? Especially the large cities. I mean, this is a city in which you have half of its population living in about 7% or 8% of land. They would know more about it. And yet the question is, Why are slums being allowed on so much land? But hello, do you know how much land they occupy? It's less than 10% of Mumbai. So I think the ability to think
Less than 1% in Delhi. Yeah.
exactly, right? And so I think beyond the domain skills, beyond in the media, beyond your media skills, what would be really, really essential at this point is the ability to think critically, to ask the questions that need to be asked. And for this, you could be an engineer, you could be a sociologist, you could have spent 4 years doing law, but these skills, I think, need to be developed, and these are the skills that we're going to keep needing to make the work as much complex and meaningful as the cities themselves are. So a whole set of skills, I would say.
Perfect. Let me take two questions from the chat box, and I'll ask any one of you to pick it up. And one is divided amongst us because I want us to close on time. The first is from an urban anthropologist who's basically saying, have you had folks that have gone on to work? One question is for me. Have we had fellows gone on to work in arts and culture sector? And the second is one that I'd like one of you all to volunteer to take, which is where would you say urban anthropology fits into the urban sector in terms of employment opportunities outside the academia? That's one question. So if you've had urban anthropologists work with you, in what roles have they worked with you, or have you known, so which are not academic? And the second one is a slightly different one from someone coming into a PhD saying, if I want to do the PhD at IIHS, but I want to work in policy outside the academy after my PhD, what advice do you have for them what should they prioritize in their doctoral journey? What skills and experience? And maybe Rahul, this particular one you can take as someone who also is a post-PhD who works strongly in policy and implementation as well. But any takers for the first one around anthropology? Deepti, you were talking about anthropological skills in teams and in field-based work, or who would like to take this one, or any of the two, really? Deepti, start with you.
No, I mean, yeah. So, I mean, I have not directly worked with an anthropologist, but there are a lot of social scientists we worked with. However, the kind of work that we work within, especially vulnerable settlements, vulnerable to climate risks, and is where we need anthropology, where we need, ethnographic understanding of the settlement, of understanding what cultures they are, what kind of behaviors one could predict and study them, and also kind of then try to see how we can mobilize an entire kind of people to be participating in the development process of the area. So in all our actually, the kind of openings that we have, we do put political science, anthropology, social science scientists as, we haven't received any person who's applied to it, or maybe one probably from IIHS, I remember. And, frankly speaking, we had said yes to all of them. So we're like, we need all of these, people who have interviewed. So yes, I mean, this is the kind of work that's possible.
Thanks. Smruti, you have your hand up. Yeah. Unmute.
Sorry. A quick word in to say that I know two people in anthropological fields in Mumbai who are looking for researchers and not finding any, to bring in work at the intersection of cities and food and anthropology. So very specifically culinary anthropology, right? I also know people who are trying to put up, who are trying to think in terms of a museum, like a people's museum, and are looking for multidisciplinary skills, including anthropology, of course. So I think we need to look beyond the box, really.
No, and just to say that one of the large projects, so IIHS is also an employer, right? Not just a university. And one of the projects I lead at IIHS right now is a 3-year, 4-country study on the effects of climate change on health in vulnerable housing settlements. And it's entirely ethnographic. And the reason for it is that even when we started the project and our funders supported the project, they said, we know the science, we need the story. We need to know the language in which people understand climate, health, and their own vulnerability, because in the end of the day, we need to understand adaptation responses that are led by people. So there is, for us at IIHS, if I look at my own teams, the presence of anthropologists is very strong. And they are, and my interest actually is more that I don't only want the anthropologists to be doing ethnography. So in my team, ethnography is done as a method by many people, and the anthropologists are equally good geospatially, because that's also where that interdisciplinary growth comes. So it's also a way for anthropologists to not be one-note anthropologists who only do one thing. Anthropologists also do multiple kinds of research now, and I think that's really the growth that you're allowed. What about the second question on what should one focus on in PhDs to then not be in the academy, but actually be? Soubadra, Rahul, would you like to come in on this? Rahul, you want to go first? I'll come to Soubadra later.
Yeah, I mean, this question has come up a few times in the last few years, and I actually feel like it has nothing to do with the PhD, right? It has to do with a good PhD program that is, of course, if you're doing critical studies, maybe it's a little harder to get into, say, normative policy or roles in organizations. It might not be your interest, but otherwise, any PhD program will equip you with the skills of taking all of the methodological skills, whether it's qual or quant, language to be able to speak well in the policy space across audiences, and sort of you demonstrated sort of expertise in drafting and sort of crafting research right from the beginning, seeing it through, doing field work, writing it up, right? So the PhD program in general should set you up. I think the biggest challenge I've seen with people who want to take up non-academic careers is that they actually prefer the academy and the incentives of the academy. So more than the program, you have to be clear that you are comfortable with stepping into a non-academic space. If you're driven by certain incentives that are publication incentives and the kind of life that you have in academia, then those are the incentives that will sort of make you feel like less than productive in a public policy space, because you will not be publishing first author things. You will not be at conference in the same kind of way that you would be. And often I think I've met a lot of people now who found this transition very hard. And it's actually because they're sitting in a policy organization, but dreaming about academia. So I would say if you want to work in a policy organization after a PhD, first be sure you want to do it. And think about which incentives interest you. The PhD, regardless, will prepare you for both. Somewhere, say, in the third or fourth year, it might be good to take a call, whether you want to start thinking about partnering with a policy organization to do your field work, or you want to spend more time actually writing that book, right? So if you want to write that book, write the book. But this, I think, is as much as a personal call about what interests you. But don't sit in the policy organization and then feel bad about the unwritten book. Yeah.
Soubadra?
I agree a lot with Rahul. Yeah. But, I would just tell an example how a PhD has made a difference in one sector, particularly the CSR, which hands over the funds. Earlier, we used to have people who quite didn't understand, but just disperse the funds. So I think having the band of PhDs trained in, at least in our sector, I think it has really facilitated meaningful conversations and funding projects and supporting activities, in a more streamlined fashion. Otherwise, they would just come do the tick marks and not evaluate on the ground. So we really are finding more and more people getting into the CSR sector, and many such interfaces. I think PhD helps in such. Really helps in even a sector which really needn't be academic later, not publishing papers, but definitely they have made a lot of difference having a PhD in those sectors. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we're at time, so I'm going to very briefly just read out the one question which I really want answered. And again, I'll read them both together and I'll type in answers. But if you guys can have one last word before as we close, and also one sentence not more, because otherwise we will enter into paid sponsorship deals on online webinars, on what your experience has having graduates of IHS classrooms work with you. But just one sentence, because I don't want to make it feel like we asked you to do that. So the two questions, just want to keep you in mind as you come back for one last word to everybody. The first question is for someone, Deepti, I'll just ask you to pick it up. Practicing architect with a master's degree, interest in transitioning into urban research with think tanks, and just sort of saying, how do you make that transition if you've been practicing for many years as an architect, but not done research? Do you go entry level? Do you go mid? How do you do that? Just that. And the second question for all of you, which I think is a fantastic question, how important do you find knowledge of regional languages when it comes to being employable in the sector? What is the role of knowing even multiple regional languages in the sector? So I'll close with that in that. So why don't I just go around circle? Deepti, do you want to open?
Yeah. So yes, I mean we've had professionals who have done architecture, like hardcore architecture, and then kind of moving on to research. I feel, I mean, if you are with an organization like IIHS who's then opening up, kind of various kind of understanding of urban systems, architecture has already in your DNA created, spaces for you to operate as a researcher and, kind of investigate in the urban. So what the visualization skills, for example, that architects bring in, the technical skills that architects bring in, are really important in the work that we do, especially at WRI. So yeah, I mean, all the skills plus the research skills will just add into this, kind of moving on, transitioning into an urban practice.
Thanks so much. And a quick line about IIHS graduates.
So Neha Shigwan, she joined I think a couple of years back as an intern. Then she was a program associate. Now she's a senior program associate, and the whole sort of a journey of the climate action plan, and then from there on the climate budgeting process. She's had architecture experience, so I think she's the one actually who only had architecture experience. That's an example, good example.
Good parallel.
And and she had I think 3 to 4 years of experience in hardcore architecture. Right. And then from there on to kind of jump into liaisoning with government officials, negotiating on a day-to-day basis, and coming up with this huge mammoth of a project, which is the climate budget report. And this is the second year. She's worked on 2 already. So that, and also she's worked on the greening manual, which is citizens manual for greening. So yeah, so all of the skills that an architect hones, but also the research that you kind of get through the IIHS sort of way, I think kind of helps build a trajectory in this space.
Anyone else on languages or on a last word about interdisciplinary graduates night? Soubadra, should I come to you?
Yeah, so in the language, definitely, I think knowing the regional languages is key, I think. Say, for example, people are trying to study the wildlife human interactions. So, I think you really have to capture the voices from the stories from the ground. So, I think there'll be a lot of information loss if you have an interpreter. I think so. Having a regional language, knowing the regional language of the place where you work is really a plus, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you. And any thoughts on IIHS graduates who've been at ATREE with you?
Well, they all seem to have jumped into a PhD abroad.
Yes, that is always the eternal worry we all have when we're teaching is how we just immigration. I know they have made a PhD. Several of the ATREE graduates have made PhD transitions, but also because you train them so well in so many ways.
And that, I think the atmosphere, I guess.
It is also there. Thanks so much, Smruti.
Language, I think definitely yes. In fact, at Question of Cities, we're right now working on an edition on climate communication, and it's coming home to me through the various essays that people have written about how much language plays a role in understanding something like climate change, terminologies that we take for granted. And one of the most beautiful stories I got as part of this edition is that in Darjeeling and other places, they have 10 to 11 words, local words to describe rainfall of different kinds. And in cities, we just say, oh, it's drizzled and it's rained and it's flooded, and that's it. And so I think, also my own work over the years, I think language is extremely essential. Right now, about cities, about climate change, all of these, we need more people working in more languages, for sure. For me, at Question of Cities, the IIHS journey has been very, very interesting. In the very first year that we launched, we had Dr. Chandni Singh write for us on gender and climate, and her essay did very well on the website and it got quoted. TISS courses then wanted a copy and wanted to use some of the other background work. Then last year, we hired somebody from IIHS, an architect who did a course with you, Nikita Saraf, and she's doing the illustrations for us, and she's also writing for us. And we now have a person in Question of Cities who wants to go to IIHS. So
a good track on the backways. That'd be lovely. They can be
totally. And so I think what IIHS does is really, really unique. And I wish there were organizations, there were places like these in the media where you would get a whole buffet of things in one place. So yeah, it's been great knowing people. And of course, this year we took 2 interns for the first time.
One of whom got her first byline and just sent it to me with great glee. So yeah, the movement and it's also wonderful for us to have spaces like you all to send folks to, knowing that they will be appreciated and mentored. But also, and we're well over time, so I'll give Rahul last word. And then just one thing I want to say in closing about that, which is to say that when IIHS began 15 years ago, the interdisciplinarity was a question. We had staked our institutional future on it. Many of us staked our professional careers on it. Speaking about graduating from PhDs and not joining regulated academic spaces, I'm one of those people who joined a research and practice institute. And one of the things that has been really wonderful after 9 years of 350 graduates from the Urban Fellows Program is to see the employment market respond. Is to really see the employment respond, especially the market around in every discipline, from journalism to environment to planning to social protection to development studies, to basically really see folks who across the spectrum are realizing that a sensibility, and like Rahul said, this is not to counter the importance of disciplinary depth, but it is to say that in the world, we need both kinds of folks. And I think in India, we have prioritized disciplinary depth for a very long time. And now this balancing seems to have come, where a set of people who work across systems, who work across languages, not just literal languages, but disciplinary languages, who know how to ask questions of different kinds. I think that moment has really come. And so as an institution to have folks that we can call to a webinar like this, where our graduates have gone, and for you to say to younger people, you can make a life like this. I think for many of us in our generations, Deepti excluded from this one, were very much, places where we kind of were called lost. I remember, we were really sort of called slightly lost and slightly avara or confused. Now we are pluralistic and multidisciplinary with diverse interests, but for a good decade, we were just confused. So it's very good for me to see this transition. And I would encourage all of you to say that, to remember that IIHS may have started its master's and PhD programs now, but we've started them 15 years of existing with the Urban Fellows Program and our own research and practice programs because we watched the interdisciplinarity. So Rahul, last word to you and we'll close.
Some pressure doing the last word thing, but no, so very, very quickly, I think +1 on languages. We work in India. Front end your language knowledge if you have it. I work across many different states and and we'll just +1 to everything that everyone else has said. I think as far as IIHS graduates are concerned, I mean, we just had 2 interns who've both been offered full-time positions at Indus Action, one within the research team with me and another with the operations team. So you can also see the diversity of positions that they are capable of joining. I think they come in with a bunch of really interesting transferable skills on data, on thinking about data critically, and you say visualization and GIS. And so there's a lot of these skills that I think are very, very useful. But I think for me, the most important thing is that typically Indian education on average leaves you with sort of only middling desire to learn, I think, and to be curious, especially after even our undergraduate education, while in many cases is good and gets you technically competent. I don't know how much it does for sort of the desire to learn and the quest for knowledge. And I have a feeling that and a strong feeling that IIHS the fixes that problem. So that's what I've been most happy about with the people who have come in, that regardless of where they were with their journeys in terms of either fitting themselves into interdisciplinary or just disciplinary buckets, they come in saying, with a desire to read, with a desire to know more, to connect more, to build bridges. And I think that is, to me, very, very powerful. I like to have curious, interested people who have felt safe in an organization to learn diverse things, to ask silly questions. And then when they come into an organization where they have to get to work, I think that they bring in sort of a kind of fresh energy, which is really fun and very important.
Thank you so much for that. Thank all four of you for really taking the time and responding with such consideration and thoughtfulness. There are many, many comments saying how appreciated these perspectives are. And I think for a lot of younger people, they don't get to hear from organizations and institutions. So I think thank you again for us for being partners with IIHS and now IIHS University for so long. And just to say in closing, for everybody and for all those who attended the webinar, the recording will be up on our social media channels, like the recording of all our other webinars. And to say that if you're in Bangalore, then tomorrow there is an open day on campus in the IIHS Sadashivnagar campus. So feel free to stop by during the day in person, check out the campus, check out the library, meet faculty, meet people, meet the administration. It's a really great way to get to know everybody. I hope that you all remember that applications for this year's both the master's and the PhD close on the 20th. So a good way to use your weekend. And join me again in thanking all four of our panelists. Really, really wonderful to spend this hour with you. I apologize for going 15 minutes over, but couldn't resist using it. And you'll be happy to know that for everyone who wants to talk to you much, much more, we have told them to do some detective work and Google you and figure out how to reach you and not become the conduit to flooding your inbox. But a wonderful Friday evening to everybody. And I've put the website and the information in the chat again about the open day. And we hope to see many of you applying. Thanks, Smruti. Thanks, Soubadra. Thanks, Deepti. Thanks, Rahul, very, very much. Take good care.